I would like to introduce you, first of all, briefly to the project that this work belongs to. It's called the Shared Green Deal project. It's a 5-year EU-funded Horizon project, working with social sciences and humanities to contribute to a responsible, equitable, and desirable Green Deal. So the project involved the setting up and the running of 24 local experiments in the locations that you can see on your map to the right. So we had quite a spread geographically. And then our talk today represents one of the 5 secondary analysis reports on the different themes. We had 5 different themes on working as a secondary analysis. So we were the first, the gender and diversity. Then we also have justice, vulnerabilities and inequalities, governance agendas, conventions and framings, societal challenges post-COVID-19, and also geographic differences and evolutions across time. So there will be other webinars that also introduce the rest of the themes. Also, this is a really good chance for us to announce that as part of this project and through building these communities, we're now creating a European forum for connecting pretty much those spaces, connecting practice, policy, and research. We're calling this forum the Shared Green Societies, and we're launching it in January in Brussels. But please follow this link and you can find out more, and it would be great to hear from you on this. And these are the partners of the project. And now I will actually begin by introducing the speakers for today. So first I would like to introduce Pia Weisser. So Pia, would you like to?
Yes. I will. Thanks. Yeah, my name is Pia Weisser from Women Engaged for a Common Future. We are an ecofeminist network organization that is based in Germany, the Netherlands, and France. And we focus on the nexus of climate, energy, and gender. So in Shared Green Deal, we have been involved in supporting, for example, the energy efficient renovation experiment, and with my colleagues Rose and Franzi worked on this gender and intersectional diversity analysis that I'm happy to present to you in a minute.
That's great. Thanks for this, Pia. So now I would like to welcome our guest speaker, Marielle Feenstra, and ask her also to introduce herself. Marielle?
Yes, thank you so much for this wonderful presentation opportunity, also to present our NGO 75 Inc., which stands for SDG 7 Clean Energy and SDG 5 Gender Equality. We're based in the Netherlands, in Rotterdam, and working on the intersectionality of the just energy transition, not only by research, but also by hosting and supporting a community of female professionals in the energy transition. We're reaching over 1,400 now, so also ensuring that those voices are heard in policy and research.
That's great. Thank you, Marielle, for that. And Marielle will come back later with some insights. And finally, my name is Aggeliki Aggeli. I'm a research assistant at Aalborg University in Copenhagen. And I'm working with the sociological, let's say, aspects of energy and sustainability transition. And I have a focus on specifically participatory and inclusive methodologies for engagement. So now, I'm sorry, I'm having a, there you go. I'm going to pass it on to my colleague, Pia.
Yes. So firstly, we will go into how we understood and explored gender and intersectional diversity throughout our analysis, to come with a few examples, and then go on to the successful learning points that we had out of this process, to policy recommendations that we crafted based on these insights, and then, yeah, as Aggeliki said, a reflection from Marielle. Before, after the half an hour, we have time for questions. So how did we understand and explore gender and intersectional diversity through our analysis? First, gender balance in attendance was widely reported in the data. So we did analyze that. However, this did not always ensure active participation of all gender in the experiments, as there were gender differences in the way that people engaged, depending also on the topic of the social experiments. Second, we understood gender as a social technical dimension, so as general understandings or socially constructed and embedded in people's everyday life and in social cultural norms. It, for example, showed that traditional gender roles and power imbalances often result in men occupying visible leadership positions while women hold informal influence. One main gender role was that was very evident in the data was the management of tasks and finances and household members by women. Third, we looked at gendered practices of everyday routines, and there was evidence in the data of how, for example, intergenerational knowledge sharing played a role in translating Green Deal concepts into practical actions, especially through, for example, women's engagement in families and schools. But also working in socially feminized sectors such as the textile and food sector, women in our experiments reported that their practices relating to production and consumptions are changing in a more sustainable, circular way. On the other hand, in socially masculinized sectors such as construction, gender division remained, for example, on technical knowledge. So the fourth point is intersections of gender with other categories. So we do not claim to systematically apply an intersectional analysis here that fully unpacks the systems of domination present in the experiments. And we are aware of these shortcomings. However, we wanted to shed light on the way that multiple issues can intersect with gender in the case of the social experiments. And that is, for example, how the effort to include diverse participants addressed intersecting in identities unevenly. So more attention was paid to, for example, age and disability due to the project's design, while less attention was paid to racial and ethnic dynamics. And last but not least, gendered communication. We paid attention to the way that gender was communicated about in the experiments through the reporting that we got from our local partners, but also by consortium partners who guided local partners in the social experiments. And I'll pass on to you, Aggeliki, with the next slide.
Yes, thank you for that, Pia. And now I would like to introduce you to some specific examples of some of the things that Pia introduced. So for the different dimensions of gender and also intersectionality. So starting with gender dynamics and this kind of paradox of a gender balance with the idea of dynamics in regard to representation as opposed to kind of real participation in the activities. So just because you manage to get a diverse group of people together does not mean that everybody in that space participates equally. So a lot of social norms or stereotypes often sort of dominated our interactions. For example, people perceived that there was no observed inequality in their representation, as the quote suggests. So for example, when a man dominates a conversation, that is normal. And then going on to suggest that there was no inequality, it was just men having more questions. So there were sort of persistent stereotypes that kind of highlighted that across, and that suggested that the representation, it just kind of often is a bit tricky. So then on the other hand, in regard to the intersectional representation, so how, let's say, diversity affected the kind of experiment, we can see again that there is issues. So, for example, on the left, we have a shortfall of this intersectional recruitment. So regarding, for example, recruiting people from, backgrounds that might have a disability, different types of disability. So as the quote says, that people with disabilities were contacted, but however, despite to the them being notified, the project objectives did not actually allow them to actively engage with the experiment. That can be a little bit problematic, because the issue here is that although there might be provisions or, let's say, information and awareness, we need to understand what are the wider structural issues that would not make, for example, that space or that area of work accessible for people. So it's not just pointing out to the disability or to people that are not able to join. And at the same time, to the right, we had this idea of the lack of diversity in the representation. So the quote, as it highlights, the group that was put together was quite homogeneous, despite the fact that there were people from different backgrounds. But again, there were more people from, white Swedish, for example, people in that. And that, again, shows that information itself and awareness is not enough in order to reach people that might not be able to participate. And that's because there are different types of issues that might prevent them from participating. And that's not just awareness. And then looking at a lot of norms and stereotypes that we found in the experiments themselves. So, for example, something that is quite prevailing is that women are the ones that manage the house economy and that also the energy bills or the finances of the home. So again, quite stereotypical roles about, women being on the inside of the house and men looking after the outside, the kind of external stuff and the technical things. But also to the right, we had this perception of women's availability and time. So as it suggests, women are more available, they're more at home, so then they can deal with things better and faster than men. And that was a quote coming from our efficient renovations experiment, and that kind of had the extension of expectations, let's say, for women to not only multitask being carers at home, but also take the home management and in extension the renovation process. Then again, in terms of expertise or gender performances, we see that there are, again, some roles that are in specific industries that are quite gendered, and in either case, they're very feminized or masculinized. So on the left, we have an example from our sustainable food where we talk about farming. So this suggests that the larger, more commercial farms are dominated by men, whereas the smaller scale and more sustainable farms have attracted or started to attract more women. And then we have professions such as, for example, being a teacher. And that was a case in Bulgaria where the majority of teachers in schools are women. But also here, it's important that, again, the active parent, let's say the more active parent in schools is usually the mother. So again, it's kind of a very gendered space. And to the right, we have, again, this gendering in the renovation experiment, which reflects both what happens inside the home, but also outside in the building industry. So again, the men are more kind of, let's say, expected to talk about the technical subjects, whereas women kind of relate to the comfort of everyday life, how to keep things normal, to keep going, but also in terms of having the control, let's say, of the finances. So in the process of this, we sort of highlighted a lot of positive points that happen and also some challenges. However, now I'm kind of going to concentrate on the more positive sides. So, for example, considering and planning in gender and intersectional diversity at an early stage is really important for an experiment, as it happened, for example, in our renovation experiment, which had a target of 60% women or participants identifying other than men in both the householder side and also on the professional participants. And also in our clean energy experiments, which managed to use representatives from the social services department and their experience of gender equality for the recruitment, as well as the facilitation of women-only focus groups to generate visions for the energy future of the local community in Poland. we also highlight that it's important to adopt gender inclusive and gender sensitive language to support the use of local dialects, to avoid perhaps technical terminologies or other specialized terminologies that might be non-inclusive for some people. It's important to generate safe spaces in its community to allow for these multiple perspectives to be heard and develop. And then as part of this process, it's important to have transparent ways in which decisions are made, as well as allow for the challenging of those stereotypically gender professions, for example, or roles in these spaces. It's important to design in, again, the planning of the experiment itself. It's important to kind of understand how to better do it to include people, for example, care about how people will get there, transportation, accommodation, care provision, and all these things that are really important. And at the same time, it's important to not just target for the consensus of the community groups, for example, of a given context, but actually to understand and map what are the experiences of those that might not be considered to be the norm or the average in a local population. Finally, it's important to assess who could be considered socially excluded or disadvantaged and focus on how to support their inclusion in the best way. So these good practices need to be discussed, and also it's important to have someone that takes responsibility from the beginning about how, for example, to recruit people or how to actually adopt all these good practices. So now I'm gonna pass it on back to Pia.
Yes, you can directly go to the next slide. So I will shortly introduce you to the policy recommendations that are based on this work that we did. So to how to strive for intersectional justice in the European Green Deal, we want to mainstream and acknowledge intersectionality in EU Green Deal strategies. So to capture diverse experiences in green transitions and not look at the issues separately, but link them. There should be a provision of accessible and targeted training for researchers and project implementators. A big need is to collect holistic gender disaggregated data on the green transition that has a focus on gender stereotypes, but it's important to not only collect data on issues of representation, but also economic and social realities of green transitions. That also reflects to the reporting. There is a need for gender indicators in the reporting processes of all Green Deal topics. And one point that is very central to our analysis is to acknowledge reproductive labor as a key pillar of the green transition. It's important to investigate intra-household dynamics and care work, and how this is distributed unequally and what impact that has in regards to the green transition. And finally, to use Green Deal communications to challenge gender stereotypes and to include gender transformative approaches. Well, next slide, please. So conclusion, in short, in half an hour, gender needs to be considered alongside other structural inequalities to generate an intersectional approach and understanding of the green transition. Gender norms, roles, and stereotypes need to be analyzed as shaping these dynamics and inequalities. Care work needs to be acknowledged as a crucial pillar. And there need to be more opportunities for co-creating inclusive knowledge and expertise. So now, Aggeliki, I think.
That's great. And now I will like to introduce again and pass on the floor to Marielle. I've stopped sharing. I can go back into it, but maybe I cannot see you like that. And Marielle, we would like to hear from you, your experience on this, any comments, reflections, questions.
Yes, thank you both for a very insightful presentation and very readable and solid and robust research in your report. I've been working on the gender and energy nexus since 2000, so that is a long time. And unfortunately, I have to say there's not that much new knowledge in your report. And I should take that as a compliment, because it is again more and more important to reinforce what is gender mainstreaming and why is gender mainstreaming so important in an energy transition. In my opinion, it's important because we're reaching what I call the human limit of the energy transition. Acceptation, adaptation, and mitigation is considering more and more complicated and difficult. The front runners already have an electric vehicle, solar panels, heat pumps, and a retrofitted energy efficient home. But the hard to reach energy users and the majority of the energy users don't, and they're facing a climate that is changing with longer winters, hotter summers, and way more challenges also to overcome the climate changes now in Europe. So if we want to ensure that the energy transition and climate change mitigation has reached and well, is getting improved and reach more people, it needs to be more inclusive. And these experiments of the Green Deal of Europe does demonstrate how difficult it is to make these implementations social just and social inclusive. And it has to do with a couple of dimensions. It's you're highlighting the social technological dimension, but also the economic dimension. We know that there is a very severe gender income gap in Europe. It's not decreasing, it's increasing. That has an impact, a lifelong impact on how people can invest in energy efficiency, how people can invest in financially in adapting their homes to climate changes. But it also has an impact on how people feel part of a green transition. It has to do with educational gaps. The social technical dimension also demonstrate that this energy transition, we had been through energy transitions before, but this energy transition is very strongly technological focused. And from a technological perspective, I trust the engineers. We probably are able to go through this energy transition. However, we are with a lot of people, and we are with a lot of diverse people. And taking an intersectional approach demonstrates how the diversity in the homes is important to take into consideration if we want to move to a supply oriented, to a demand driven energy transition. So it has to do with the energy transition comes into the households, comes into everyday choices in consumption patterns, in energy consumption patterns, but also in food choices, mobility choices, and housing options. And the possibility to absorb and to adapt and to resonate with crises like the COVID crisis or the current climate crisis is depending on your gender role in society. It has a role to do with your economic opportunities, your social technological opportunities, cultural context. I think this intersectionality also demonstrated, for example, cooking habits are really different between cultural backgrounds. And emphasizing also the reproductive roles of men and women, the caregiving responsibilities is extremely important to highlight again and again, because we see that throughout our lifespan, we have different caregiving responsibilities, and also more men are getting involved in caregiving responsibilities. So focusing on reproductive tasks is not only benefiting women, it's benefiting everyone from all generations and from all different type of households. What is very crucial, and what I really think is important that you are flagging in your report, is the communication. And what is a bit, well, disappointing to see throughout all these years that we are working on gender mainstreaming, and that gender mainstreaming is very strongly focused in policy recommendations, and especially at the national and the international level, at the European level, is how this is remain a very siloed communication. So when we look at the social policies or health policies or educational policies, we do see there is a bit more gender awareness. But why not adding this gender awareness and more gendered, overcoming gender stereotypes in the other policy fields, like mobility, like transport and energy, and but also agricultural policy, for example. We do see very strong stereotypes as a man climbing in a windmill and a woman cooking on a wood stove, for example. This communication does matter. It has an impact on all, and in all life spans and all life phases of human beings. And another point you touched upon in your report is labor markets, and who works also in the energy sector, and how are decisions made in the energy sector by either participation in energy communities or participation in local energy or local initiatives and experiments. It also matters on who works in the sector, and we know that the involvement of women in STEM is very low. We, as a consequence, many women don't find the way to the energy sector as a professional career, where we also see that there is a lack of gender reflection and resonation and representation. With that being said, if we move to who works in the sector, who research the sector, who implement the experiments, well, if that is not a reflection or resonation of the diversity of society, it's important to focus on training. And I think that is something I would like to conclude with. The training for researchers and implementers, as rightfully addressed in your policy recommendations, is very crucial, because we can try to fix the women and focus on the vulnerable, hard to reach energy users, but we should also educate those that implement them and those that are working in this field to collect the data, to monitor the data, and to report on the data. So thank you for that opportunity. Yeah.
Thank you, Marielle. That is a lot of really useful and to the point comments. I think a lot of the things that you said resonate with us, but if I will thank you at this point, and I will ask our colleague Espen to stop the recording at this stage.